We're starting not with a market forecast, but with a provocation. For 40 years, the economics of marketing pushed creative the wrong side of the ledger. Media procurement generated the margins. The brief sat in the cheap column. The agentic era is about to correct that, not out of generosity, but out of structural inevitability. Sorry about that, stumbling on that word. When agent can't execute anything at scale in real time, average work becomes economically inefficient. The advantage moves the only thing that can be optimized away. What is that thing? That's the question. Colleen DeCourcy is the CMO of Sonos and former Global Chief Creative Officer of Wieden Kennedy. She has spent a career watching what happens when a great idea gets put inside a broken system, and what it looks like when the system finally changes around it. She predicted this moment in 2018. She's here to collect. Please welcome Colleen DeCourcy.
Well, hello. All right. I'm here because we know some things are changing. We all do. It's a moment where we're trying to figure out what happens next. What I would like to do is back up and talk about the last time I was here. Randall asked me to stand in front of a room like this. It was 2018, IAB annual leadership meeting. He was running the organization that had more than any other really shaped the programmatic era. And he handed me the mic and said, "Tell them what you think," which not a lot of people were brave enough to do. Thank you, Randall. I don't know if he knew exactly what I was going to say, but I have a feeling that he did, because Randall always has been the kind of person that invites the argument that he needs to hear, even when it's aimed at the thing that he helped to build. What I said in 2018 was this: disruption is one thing and one thing only. More people getting more access to tools that used to require money, scale, and permission. The printing press put the monks out of business. The camera put portrait painters out of business. Instagram arguably took Kodak out of business, and it only needed 450 people to do it. Kodak needed 120,000 people to do what they did. So progress is the shortening of the distance from A to B, and each of those steps, the friction is taken out. And then I said the thing that some people in the room weren't really fully ready to hear. And a lot of the current infrastructure of marketing amounts to friction, is what I said. I wasn't talking about the work. I was talking about the machinery that was built around the work. The holding companies, the media networks, the programmatic pipes, the attribution models, the endless intermediary layer that had grown up between a brand's desire to connect with a human being and the human being it was trying to reach. Now, that was 8 years ago. They've called this talk The Future of Creativity, and I want to tell you why I think that title is more radical than it sounds. Because for the last 20 years, I don't actually think that creativity had much of a future in this industry. It had a past, it had a reputation, and a lot of award shows. But the economic structure of the business had quietly moved to the cheap side of the ledger. I'm standing here today because the argument that I was making then has finally actually materially started to come true. And I want to talk about what that means, not as a victory lap, not as a celebration, though there is something worth celebrating here, I think, but as an honest account of where we are, what we're building towards, and honestly, what we could still really get wrong. You've heard a lot of talks about what these tools can do: demos, case studies, efficiency gains, agents that execute campaigns from natural language briefs, creative generated at scale, loops that close in real time, all of it real, all of it honestly, genuinely new. I want to talk about what the tools can't do, because I think that's the conversation this room needs to have, and I haven't heard anyone else having it. Oop, we just skipped all the way through. Oh, there I go. Look at that. It would be good if I knew how to use this, wouldn't it? So let me tell you what happened between 2018 and now. The programmatic era promised us something genuinely beautiful: the right ad to the right person in the right place at the right time. Personalization at scale, the end of waste, an industry finally as intelligent as the people that it was trying to reach. What we got instead was very fast, very efficient machine for harvesting attention that someone else had already cultivated. Here's the thing about programmatic optimization. It is extraordinarily good at finding people who are already on their way to you. It is almost useless at creating people who weren't. It can harvest a field. It cannot plant one. For a long time, that was fine, but we stopped planting. The economic logic of the system, it pushed relentlessly towards harvest. Performance marketing was measurable, brand building was slow, and really hard to attribute. And so the fields thinned. The targeting got faster, the machine kept running, and running, and running, more efficiently, on less and less. The industry gave this a lot of different names. The commoditization of attention, the race to the bottom of the CPMs, the walled garden problem, the cookie apocalypse, that was my favorite. But underneath all of it was one thing. We had mistaken the harvest for the farming. We had built an entire industrial infrastructure on top of that mistake. So, what I know now that I didn't know then. In 2018, I was the CCO and co-president of Wieden+Kennedy. I'd spent my career on the agency side. I was making the case for creativity, arguing that the work was the thing, that the brief was the first creative act, and that data was a form of empathy, not a replacement for it. I believed all of that. I still do believe that. But I was making that argument from the outside. I was making it from a place of earned conviction, yes, but also from a place of relative safety. An agency can hold a position. An agency can refuse to do work that it doesn't believe in. An agency can say no. A brand often has trouble saying no to itself. 18 months ago, Sonos, the company I'm now the CMO of, shipped a software update. Some of you may know what happened. The app broke. Products that people loved, that had been in their homes for years, stopped working the way that they were supposed to. The trust that the brand had built, not through advertising, through the actual experience of living with the product, it broke alongside of that. I joined Sonos in January, 5 months ago. My job is to help fix that. The Sonos problem is not a marketing problem. It was a product problem, and then it became a trust problem, and then it became a brand problem. And in that order, no amount of targeting precision or creative optimization has helped. What was broken was something upstream of all of that, the relationship between the company and the people who had chosen to bring it into their homes. What rebuilds that? It isn't a campaign. It's not a new positioning. What we've learned is definitely not a better media mix. What rebuilds it is the same thing that built it in the first place, right? It's making something genuinely good. It's being honest about who you are and what you're from. I tell you this not because I want to make this a Sonos talk, but because I think that the path that I've had to walk these last 5 months, it's a version of the path that everybody in this room is walking. The question of what you're actually for. The question of whether the work you're making reflects something true or something optimized. The question of whether you're farming or whether you're just harvesting. The brief is the planting. So here's what I want to say about the agentic era. And I mean this as the most optimistic thing that I know how to say. For the first time in 20 years, the technology, it's pointing in the right direction. Not because AI is magic, because of a very specific and structural shift that I would like to make visible, because I think we talk about it without naming it clearly enough. If you look at the column on the left, for 20 years, the system looked like this. You made the work, you bought the media. Weeks or months later, you got a report. Creative upstream, media downstream, signal delayed by so long, it was almost useless for improving the thing that generated it. You could make average work, and you could hide behind a good media plan. The distance between cause and effect, Well, it was wide enough to park a lot of uncomfortable fictions inside of. Now, on the other column, the loop is closing. The work goes live. The signal comes back immediately. The system adjusts in real time. Creative and media are not sequential steps anymore. They're one continuous system. And a closed loop, it just really doesn't tolerate fiction for very long. Average work just doesn't get out. It doesn't just underperform. It becomes economically inefficient because the system finds out immediately that it doesn't work and it stops spending on it. So there is nowhere to hide anymore, which means the advantage moves not to more content, but to more distinct content, work that creates its own signal. Now, that is terrifying if you've been making safe work. That is liberating if you've been trying to make real work and losing the argument. So that is genuinely new. That is worth a founding event to me. So let's make that concrete, because I think the abstract version of this argument can go past people. You write a brief, not a targeting document, not a spec sheet, an actual brief. Something like, this product is for people who take sound seriously, but stop believing premium audio was for them. Find them. An agent takes the intent, it goes to market, it finds audiences whose behavior matches that description across publishers and across platforms. It negotiates placements, it executes the buy. The creative variants that you've approved get served dynamically, and the signal from what actually works flows back into the campaign before it's even finished. Not a post-campaign report, a conversation happening in real time between the work and the people that it was meant for. What used to require a media planner, a trafficker, an optimization analyst, and 3 weeks of back and forth now happens continually in the background, which frees you for exactly one thing. Let me be specific about why creativity got separated from media in the first place. Because it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a failure of taste. It really was a margin decision. When the holding companies acquired the full-service agencies and extracted the media function, they weren't being Philistines. They were following the money. Media procurement at scale generated margins that creative work simply couldn't match. So they built global media networks. They turned the creative agency into the thing that you had to do to justify the buy. The work became a cost center. The placement became the product. And for the economic logic, it reinforced itself for 40 years because nobody could prove the damage fast enough to matter. Here's what that actually meant in practice. It meant that the brief, the thing that determines everything downstream, sat on the cheap side of the ledger. It meant that the people whose job it was to find the first true thing were structurally downstream of the people whose job it was to buy the most impressions for the least money. It meant that creativity was always making its case to an infrastructure that had a financial interest, truly, in not being persuaded. Agentic doesn't just change the workflow. It threatens the arbitrage. When creative and media operate as one continuous optimizing system, the gap that margin was extracted from, it closes. You cannot charge separately for the thing that you fused together. Which means some people in this room, and I say it with respect and without apology, have a business model that this revolution is directly challenging. That is not a reason to resist it. That is a reason to get ahead of it. So, when people say creativity is in a revolutionary moment, I don't think they're wrong. But what they're describing is the wrong revolution. Creativity itself, it hasn't changed. Real ideas are real ideas. The brief has always been the first act. The leap was always the thing. Bernbach knew it. Dan Wyden knew it. You've known it your whole career, even when the industry was organized to prove you wrong. What's changing is creativity's position in the economic order. For 40 years, the system was built to undervalue it, to move it to the cheap side of the ledger, to make the work the thing you had to do to justify the buy. The agentic era does not change what creativity is. It changes what creativity is worth. When the average work becomes economically inefficient in real time, the thing that can't be automated stops being a cost center and starts being the only durable competitive advantage that exists inside the system. That is not a creative revolution as much as it's a correction. It's a long overdue, structurally enforced, economically inevitable correction. And for those of us who spent careers arguing that the work was the thing, that the ideas were what we were searching for, that the brief came first, that the data was a form of empathy and not a replacement for it, well, welcome to being right at scale. But here is the condition. Here's the thing I need to say clearly in this room, particularly on this day, is that the loop only works if you start somewhere true. A system that optimizes creative against outcome signals is only as good as the creative it starts with. If you feed it average work, it will optimize average work into slightly less average work, faster. If you feed it something that caught lightning, it will find the people that that lightning was meant for, and it will find them at scale and at a precision that was not ever before possible. The brief is still the first creative act. The strategist's job is still to find the first true thing. The human job, your job, our job, is still authorship of the thing that the machine then amplifies. Agentic does not replace that. It raises the stakes on it. So, what does this revolution actually require of us here in this room? I do want to be honest about AI slop, because I think it's the thing nobody in a room like this wants to say out loud, but it's the thing that we're all thinking about. The same technology that makes this agentic era possible, the generative AI at the creative layer, it's also capable of producing an almost infinite quantity of content that is technically competent and spiritually empty. It looks like work. It has all the formal properties of work. It will clear a brand safety check. It will fit the spec. It will not catch lightning. Your agent isn't an idea. At the risk of the agentic era, the specific risk that keeps me up at night is that we take the most powerful creative amplification system that we have yet built, and we feed it content that was generated by a machine that was optimizing for adequacy. That is not a technology problem. That is a leadership problem. It's a judgment problem. It's a values problem. The brands that win in the agentic era will be the ones that use these tools to go deeper on the thing that can't be automated. Finding the true thing, writing the brief that has prison yard clarity, making the creative leap that makes people go, oh, God. The brands that lose will be the ones that see agentic as a cost reduction strategy that measures success by how few humans they need to produce how much content, and they're going to mistake that volume for value. I have sat in those rooms. I have heard those conversations. And I want to say as clearly as I can, that is not the revolution Randall and Matt are building towards. That is the old mistake at a brand new speed. So, what do you do with that? This is the part people usually want to skip to, so I'll say it simply, and I'm just going to mean every word of it. Make fewer things that matter more. Treat the brief like the product. Design for signal, not for volume. Use the system to learn faster, but start with something that is worth learning from. The system is not grading your effort. It's grading the work. Which means the most important investment you can make in the agentic era is upstream of the technology. It's in the room where the brief gets written. It's in the conversation where someone asks, what is actually true about this brand? And why should anyone care? It's in the decision to go back to the last thing you knew to be true before you start building anything else on top of it. And that is where creativity lives. That is where it has always lived. And now, for the first time, the infrastructure is built to reward it. In 2018, I ended my talk with the line that I still believe. Brands that are ideas have so much more permission to engage. Media doesn't dictate the terms. Culture does. That is more true now than it was then. The friction is going. The distance between a brand and the person it wants to reach has collapsed. The tools that used to require a $100 million media budget are becoming accessible to anyone with a true idea and the skills to express it. 8 years ago, I stood in front of an industry that had built a very efficient machine for distributing work that was, on average, not very good. And I said, the end hasn't changed. Lightning in a bottle is still the goal. We just have to take the friction out of getting to it. Today, the friction's coming out. Faster than I expected, honestly. Faster than most of us expected. Which means the question is no longer whether we can get the work to the right person at the right time. The question is whether we're making work that's worth getting. That is a human question. It will always be a human question. No amount of optimization changes it. No protocol solves it. No agent makes it for you. But if you make the work that's worth making, and you build it on something that is true, and you write the brief that is honest about what you're for and who you're talking to and why it matters, everything else is infrastructure. And that infrastructure is finally catching up. The brands that win in the agentic era are the ones that will use these tools to go deeper on that thing. That is the future of creativity, not rescued by nostalgia for the way we used to make things, but freed by infrastructure that finally puts it back exactly where it belongs. At the beginning, before the buy, at the moment that someone decides what is true. So, welcome to the new creative revolution, and welcome to everything. Now please, go have ideas that are worth amplifying. Thank you.